Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by Aeros, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from First Eyes and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the Aert Studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
All right, welcome to another edition of Taming Disaster Drones for Good. We've got a special guest today. We're circling back with Chief Charles Werner, the director of the DRONERESPONDERS Program, and we're going to talk about last week's FAA UAS Symposium. It's an event that has become almost a hallmark event for both policymakers, regulators, and the movers and shakers in the unmanned systems industry. And obviously with COVID-19, it was held a little bit differently this year as a two-part virtual event. Part one took place back in June, and part two just last week virtually. And it was really public safety focused, which is why we want to re-engage with Chief Werner and learn a little bit about his take on what happened during the conference and what it means for public safety. So with that, I'd like to welcome Charles. How are you?
Hey, good day. It's really exciting to get back and talk to you again. And it's really exciting to look back at the virtual symposium for the FAA UAS program and talk about it, because it was, during this COVID-19 time that we're in, if there's a silver lining to it, we have some new opportunities to make some new connections and people that we otherwise would not have been connected with through the virtual symposium.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, there's no doubt that COVID kind of threw a curveball at everyone and continues to do so. But, travel, the cruise industry, but the event planning industry has been an industry that was particularly hit hard by this pandemic, turning it upside down with everyone scrambling to quickly deploy digital technology to be able to meet and provide content in virtual environments. And AUVSI and the FAA were really under the gun because, with Exponential scheduled for last May and then the symposium scheduled for June, they had to make some quick decisions. And yeah, I think there were a few growing pains. I mean, there always is with technology, people trying to learn how to use the new technology and different issues arise. But all in all, I think it went really well. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I think it went really well. Sure, there were some glitches. I think they had to do some adjustments with broadband capacity and those kind of things. But I think this is going to set the tone for a new way that we go forward. I think that even when we have in-person conferences in the future, we're going to see a virtual piece to that adds in the element of being able to connect with others that just can't make the travel. And I think with COVID-19, we're going to see some challenges ahead with limitations from departments and their funding and their travel abilities in the future. So I think that's going to change. But I was really pleased that we had the opportunity, both you and I, to moderate panels for this particular session.
Yeah. And first, let me say, I agree with you. I think what we're seeing here is an evolution on how live events are going to be conducted moving forward. They will need to have a virtual component in some capacity. And I think one good thing maybe coming out of this pandemic is it's forcing organizations to move sooner rather than later to deploy this new technology and learn how to use it more effectively. So I think that's going to be a good thing for everyone down the road. And it definitely was nice to be able to have a part two of the symposium focused more heavily on public safety. And I think we saw a higher amount of engagement that I would have anticipated just by the amount of public safety people that seemed to be taking place in the event. Is that your sense?
It is. And, I think we saw a lot of activity when we did the panels. I did the panel on firefighting drones. And it was really nice because we talked about the aspects of the firefighting operations themselves, but we also made sure that we let people know we don't want to be boxed into a single discipline with our unmanned aircraft system. We want to continue to do cross-pollination for the different disciplines, and that even though there are a number of specific firefighting missions, almost all the agencies that we're seeing are flying multiple missions. And as you know, we shared in our study that we discovered there were 17 use cases. And from that, we had just a lot of interaction of people in the chat room and asking questions that, again, we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, so let me set the table here a little bit, because I'm sure a lot of you out there listening haven't attended an FAA symposium and are kind of wondering, like, what is this? Shouldn't this be information that's provided to us for free from a government agency? And yeah, that is an argument that some people make, but it's really a lot more than just the information. It's historically, and Charles, I know you and I have attended these events in person in Baltimore, it's really an opportunity to meet with not just the FAA, but people from all over the UAS industry who are really affecting policymaking and decision at almost every level. And the networking opportunities I've found personally during the lunch breaks and the coffee breaks and the after sessions have been as much, if not more valuable than some of the content we pick up in the actual panel sessions. So I think trying to replicate that environment in a virtual environment that had never been done before with a really compressed timetable like they had this year was a daunting task. And I think they did a pretty good job with it. I know there's a lot of public safety agencies out there that probably didn't get a chance to attend. So I think what we need to do with this period of time here with this podcast is kind of relay some of that information and kind of paint the picture for them on what happened, what was discussed, what the environment was like, and what the useful information is that they can now use moving forward.
I agree, and I think with this format, this was kind of totally different than what most of us are accustomed to. I mean, we go into webinars and we interact with it, but it has a lot more features to it. The networking feature, which I found very helpful, allowed me to see the other participants and actually connect with some people both in the United States and in other countries that have now become members of Drone Responders as a result of that. So. Yeah, it's a very rich, because it also had the chat room, it had the questions and answers. I think one of the things that learned from this is that I'll do better the next time, because I had a chance to actually learn this format and how to maximize the use of it.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. I mean, even on the final day, I was going in and discovering areas that I didn't know were there. Like, it took me a while to find the roundtable sessions. I kind of stumbled into them, and I had to really hunt and peck for it. But when I found it, it was right in front of my face. I just didn't see it was there. But it's even like it's like the live shows used to be. Like, you kind of go to your first conference and you're feeling your way around, trying to understand kind of what the flow is and what the battle rhythm is and what the vibe is. And it's the same in a virtual environment. I mean, it might take a session or two or a day or two for you to kind of get comfortable using the system. And I think now, having gone through this process, for those of us who have done it, both on the speaking side and the attendee side, is it's going to prepare us better for the other events that are upcoming virtually, whether it's DJI Airworks, Commercial UAV Expo, AUVSI Exponential, and there's probably no immediate end to some of this. So I think it'll be useful information for us for the next, better part of the next year, if not beyond.
Well, I'll tell you something that was unique to this that was of really good value is that, when you go to the in-person meetings or the in-person conference, you typically have to choose which session you want to observe, listen to, or participate in. In this particular case, they're all recorded. So you have the opportunity to go back and watch all of them, as opposed to being able to choose one of three and watch it when it's convenient to you to watch. It'll be interesting to see, how long this remains available, and can other people still subscribe? Can they come in and purchase the ability to look at these sessions that are out there? That'll be an interesting thing to see. But for me, I was concerned about the roundtables. I wanted to participate in the roundtables, but I didn't want to miss the other programs. And realizing that they're recorded, I was able to go into roundtables and literally spend a couple hours of active discussion, and then go back and watch the programs that I missed.
Yeah, and that is that's what we would call, I guess, a pro tip, right? It's like, had I known that much action was going on in the roundtables, I probably would have deferred some of the live panel content I was watching to watch it later when it was recorded, which I know a lot of people are doing it and engaged in some of those roundtables. So it's a learning process, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. So to kind of set the table, the theme for part 2 of the FAA UAS Symposium was largely based on drones here for good, kind of a play on the drones for for good. And with that, again, public safety was foremost topic that was covered. We had keynotes from Roxana Kennedy, the chief of the Chula Vista Police Department, several panel sessions covering firefighting, which I know you led. We talked about public safety innovation, which was a panel I moderated, and counter UAS. So from your side, what were some of the real key takeaway moments that are really going to have an impact on the public safety UAS sector coming out of this symposium?
Well, one that I saw was the discussion of IPPs and what's next. Jay Merkel was asked, so why are you ending in October? And he answered saying, we've been given a mandate to come out and do this through October. That's what we have in place. And now we're going to do a report that comes out with some recommendations, and we'll see what Congress and the White House do to direct. So that's going to have a really big impact in the future. And I think that we can say that the IPP had a big impact on what we're going to talk about later with the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver.
Yeah, and let's stay on that IPP comment for a second, because I think the part a lot of people miss is the IPP, the Integration Pilot Program, was never intended to be a permanent program. It was intended to be a short-term temporary program to help us learn and test different concepts that were going to be needed for integration of UAS into the national airspace system. So, these people who kind of have this mindset of, why is it ending? It was always supposed to end. It was a temporary program to take us to the next step. And I think from what we saw, in many cases, those programs were successful. Maybe in a few they weren't successful. I know here in Florida, it never got off the ground with the Lee County mosquito abatement program that was selected that just for whatever reason wasn't able to really come to fruition. But I think a lot of good things came out of the IPP, and I think Chula Vista in San Diego is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, and I think Chief Kennedy's keynote was just she's a rock star. I mean, she came out and she really laid it out as to why would I or any police chief think about doing something with drones. And she went into sharing the innovation, the safety aspects of it, and the safety not only from the responder, but to the citizen and the community. And she gives a really compelling story about how a drone helped to de-escalate a situation with a man with a cigarette lighter gun that people thought was actually a firearm. And being able to see that de-escalated that situation and turned that event around where nobody got hurt.
Yeah, and that's a really important part of the equation here, because I think if you've been following the public safety UAS sector, you've heard about Chula Vista by this point. I mean, the Drone as a First Responder Program has been getting a lot of recognition, rightfully so. But to actually have Chief Kennedy come out and talk about some of the steps she needed to take to win over public support and what it means as a public safety leader, and also let's face it, I mean, she was a nice, diverse representation of where this industry needs to be, because too often it's older white men like you or I that are kind of out there carrying the torch. And so to have a female out there also was very powerful. Then to be telling other police chiefs, this is what you can do to become successful with this new technology, I think was just an amazing part of what came out of the symposium.
It was indeed. And again, like you said, we encourage that other women and other minorities get involved in this field, because it's huge with opportunity. And we as drone responders are encouraging everyone around the world, regardless of any type of race or gender, to jump in, take advantage of these opportunities. Yep.
100%. So a couple of the other things that I think are really important here, I heard that the discussion panels, the roundtables, were overflowing with public safety people, that they had to create some additional unplanned roundtables just to accommodate the flow of people that wanted to engage. Is that accurate from what you understand?
Yeah, I think I think it was the post episode done by Brian Wynn and Jay Merkel, where Jay Merkel said his staff came back and said the public safety roundtables are raging. That was his quote, and said that they said that there, in one case, there were 120 minutes that went with one roundtable, and that's where they had to open another roundtable to have discussions. And what's unique, what people need to understand is the roundtables were limited to 16 people, and that was done on purpose. And it worked out really well because everybody had a chance to participate in those conversations, and so that really made a difference.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that learning is going to be taking place just on the event production side. If ideally, when you have a keynote presentation, you want your entire audience in that keynote presentation. The panel sessions, you want to have full rooms, especially in live events, because nobody wants to be in an empty room, and speakers don't like to see an empty room. So, was it the right move to have roundtable discussions going on during some of these other keynotes or panel discussions? I mean, maybe yes, maybe so. Maybe the analytics will show us that there's such an appetite for roundtable discussion that we need to incorporate more of that into the event programming and less of the planned panels and planned keynotes. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how AUVSI particularly kind of analyzes the data on the back end. And of course, we're working with them to plan the Global Public Safety Summit for Exponential here coming up. So hopefully we'll have some good information on how we need to structure that as well for public safety.
And it does take a certain amount of planning. I think that we need to plan more ahead, and that people that are actually going to be on the panels or moderators really know more about the roundtables to how to take advantage of it, because I was still trying to figure out and work my way through the process when they asked, do you want to have a roundtable session following the firefighting panel? And at that point, I wasn't comfortable to go forward. Now, having seen the roundtables and how they work, I would definitely go into doing that in the next opportunity that we have to do it. But there was some really meaningful conversations that took place. One example is we talked about training. And, one of the issues that's come up is under COAs, you don't have the allowance for training, which is kind of odd since we started off when we came into this with training COAs. That's how we started going through the process. But it's been interpreted by some of the legal folks at the FAA that because it doesn't say we can train, we can't under a COA, which means in order for you to train, you have to have all your people Part 107 certified. That's something they're still working on. So that discussion came forward. And then the question came up, okay, you've got this new tactical waiver. How do we train for that? And you can't get that tactical waiver unless you have a COA, but you can't train under the COA, and you can't do beyond visual line of sight under Part 107.
Yeah. So let's flush that out a little bit further. So to train the personnel, you've got to have one certified PIC, right? A pilot in command, presumably Part 107 in most cases. And they could serve as the training instructor for new personnel coming in who aren't Part 107 trained, but want to operate the sticks and are gathering some proficiency until they take the Part 107 exam, which of course you can't do right now in a COVID-19 environment. So there's a special process for that involves watching a video and taking a test. So yeah, there are a lot of different pieces right now, and it's not going to be really clarified until we get past this pandemic.
But that test is only for an extension, though, right?
Yeah. Well, I think they've and I don't want to misspeak here, so I'm going to need to go back and look at the special requirement they put forward. I know because I just recently completed it for my second recurrence exam, and what it basically did was give me a 6-month extension from this month, which was when my renewal was up, 6 months to go out and then be able to. And the thought process here is that within the next 6 months, COVID will be under control, the testing centers will be open, and we'll be able to go out and take this exam. But we don't really know if that's going to happen. So I've got this 6-month extension right now on my Part 107 to get me to the next stage to go take the renewal, and then we'll see whether that happens. Now, if you're a new pilot coming in and you want to become Part 107 certified, I think that same process gives you kind of a temporary operating certificate until the testing center is formally open, but I don't know. I need to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, so we'll take a look. But I also wanted to tell you, so the discussion came forward was the way to get around the training is to have the person flying the aircraft and then have a dual controller at a different location so that there's a visual pilot that actually has visual, while the person's actually doing a beyond the visual line of sight operation, it still has controls to someone who is within visual line of sight. So that was an iteration that took probably about 15 minutes to get to. But again, it shows the nuances that we otherwise wouldn't have discussed.
Well, yeah, and I think that's also probably some of the questions that go on behind the scenes at the FAA when we're developing these waivers. And I want to get to the point, too, about the tactical waiver, because I know everyone's going to be interested in that. But I think the development of these waivers, those are kinds of questions that the FAA is asking that we might not always be thinking of. But, okay, in the training process, who is going to be able to control the aircraft if something, when it's out of visual line of sight and something bad is about to happen? And what does that look like? And what does that operation look like? And not, in all fairness, a lot of people are new to this industry. A lot of public safety agencies are just getting their program started, so they haven't had to deal with those kinds of scenarios. So it really is incumbent upon the FAA from a safety perspective to think that through. And sometimes it drags things out a little bit longer and they move a little slower than we might like or we might be accustomed to, but there usually is a good reason for it.
So let me talk about training for a minute. One of the things that came up was reinforced from our study that we found that was the number one priority that people saw was standardized training and certifications.
Yep.
That was again pushed forward and reinforced by those people in the roundtables, and it was the FAA who said, we really depend on public safety to push this issue of standards forward. So, and they kind of leaned on us a little bit, saying drone responders, it would be great if drone responders would help take the lead on doing some of this development and standards for training.
And, I know you have been working behind the scenes. You can't talk about everything you're working on yet because you've got certain partners and there's certain NDAs in place. But what can you share with us as far as where drone responders and the program is going to be headed over the next 6 months to help paint a stronger picture for training and certification?
Well, I think we're looking at the standards to say what standards exist, which ones are moving forward, and that we can work on to develop a little bit more, and to reach out and start engaging with some of the people that already have training programs. One of my recent podcasts that'll be coming out, I think near the same time as this one, talks with Jason Dave with the Texas Department of Public Safety and the great work they've done, and learning from that to say, let's not reinvent the wheel. We've got some places like the LA Regional Training Center, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Center of Excellence out in Colorado, and others, maybe some stuff up in New Air and in those places that are already doing some training. So let's pull that together and push that into the standards so we have some place to head.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, right? Because we do have so many disparate organizations. Some are for-profit companies, some are universities, some are nonprofits. And they've all kind of constructed their own kind of training curriculum or training course, all very well intentioned for public safety, but it's basically like everyone's got their own muffin recipe, and there's no standard for what size, shape, or consistency you need in a specific type of muffin. So different agencies are being trained in different areas according to different standards and different theories, and the real challenge here is to have that standardized format, which I know ASTM's taken a stab at, NFPA, but to really get it out there, to get a unified standard that everyone is willing to adopt and train to, and who has the financial incentive or the resources to go out and actually put that all together and spread the gospel, so to speak. And I kind of feel like it's going to be incumbent on you and drone responders to carry some of that water.
Well, I think it's all of us working collectively together, and I think the idea is let's go out and see what's out there and develop the minimum requirements for a curriculum. That doesn't mean everybody's program has to look exactly the same. It just says that the core, this is the standard we're all going to meet. So that gives the freedom of Texas or Colorado or California, if they want to do something a little bit different and above and beyond, they can. But at least when we have trainers that come, especially companies that say we can train public safety, our past has been the only thing that we know is that they've trained somebody else in public safety and it seemed to go okay. There's nothing to validate them.
Yeah, and we actually had a good discussion about that on my panel during the FAA Symposium, the Public Safety Innovation Panel, where we had Rich Gaetanis from Southern Manatee Fire Rescue, the UAS program lead over there, and DJ Smith, a surveillance agent with Virginia State Police, kind of talking about the training and standards, but then how do you blend that into tactics? And DJ's point was, we've got to take the standards, but then apply them towards the tactics of any given situation or any call out. And, that piece hasn't been there either. So it's easy to kind of sit back in the room and develop the standards, but then how do you transition that into tactical operations on scene? Any thoughts on that, on what the right pathway is for that to happen?
Yeah, I think that's the complication of or the complexity that comes with this issue of training, because not only that, we have different areas experience different types of response needs. So you might have Florida that has hurricanes more often and California that has wildfires more often. And so you're going to have to define the mission sets that are required to be trained to and prioritize them based on the probability of them occurring in your area. So that kind of sets the stage of what needs to be involved in the curriculum and the scenario-based training that's going to come with that. And I think then we're going to still be able to create the standards that say, if you're going to fly, these are the kind of mission sets and what they look like and how you achieve that in the actual tactical training of those scenarios.
Yep. I want to move forward a little bit and talk about your panel with the fire service and UAS in the fire service. I know you had Chief Sadler from York County, Coit Kessler, Michael Leo, I think was on your panel.
Yeah.
And am I missing anyone else?
Nope.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about how that went. Any huge revelations or what do the what, especially on the fire service side, folks listening today, what takeaways do you have for them that came out of that session?
So Chris Sadler really covered the journey to the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. And for the fire service, what that means is that in a hazardous material situation or a potential explosive environment or where they might be flying a law enforcement mission, we now have the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight. And so that's what he covered and how we got here. And went a little bit over the details. And then Coit Kessler talked about the training aspect and what's going on in Texas and how they're all involved in that development of the curriculum. It's not like defined from somebody at the state saying this is what it's going to be. It's really a collaborative effort with the different regional organizations out there, which we're also partners with, and what that looks like. And then Michael Leo came in and really kind of gave a review, a look back of where they started. And if you remember, they started with tethered drones. And he explained that the tethered drones, while limited in that application, really helped them learn a lot in a safe way. As he put it, that was our crawl moving forward. And then he went to the unique situations in the big city of New York City and the magnetic interference and the other radio interference issues and how he now uses a compass that he takes with him to look at the compass to see how that's reacting, because it does react to magnetics. And then we talked a little bit about the major cities working group that people can be a part of to discuss those unique challenges in big cities.
Yeah, I do remember Michael. I think it was a $2 compass, if I remember correctly. Or like he's got a really basic compass he takes around to check for magnetic interference before they conduct flight operations in New York City. And those are the kinds of little tips that I think people kind of, they tend to not be aware of. And then you hear it in a session like this, and it's like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, anything that the Fire Department of New York is doing is typically of interest to every fire department across the U.S. and around the world. And to have, Chris and Coit on that panel too. I mean, there was a lot of good information and a lot of knowledge where it's hard to compress all that into 50, 55 minutes. What kind of questions were you seeing from the audience as far as where some of the pain points were?
Well, people were asking about the tactical waiver because it still hadn't come out yet as far as the guidance information. So they were asking about that. We had people that were asking specifically about training. When did we see some progress being made as far as standards? The questions toward Texas, will you share your training information? Which they said they don't have online, but they will. Because they're changing it constantly. So they stopped putting it online because it was never up to date, because they're trying to keep it up to date. And then we had some questions about what were the heartaches or troubles for the big city moving forward and getting that buy-in of having the drones. And then there was some discussion about training and how training differed from the rural areas of like Montana to the big city of New York City, and what that looks like as far as proficiencies.
Yep. And I want to get to the tactical waiver here in just a second, because I know that's a hot button issue. But, you mentioned the big cities and the major cities, and it reminds me of the major cities group at Drone Responders, which is coming up on it's coming up on its 1-year anniversary here, I think, in about a month or so. What's the status of that, and kind of where are we looking to take that at this point?
So Michael Leo is going to take the lead on that to start setting up some regularly scheduled meetings. And what we had in the past and what we hope to have in the future is that we have departments that have programs sharing their unique experiences, because even the big cities are somewhat uniquely different in the areas they cover, maybe the weather conditions that they experience and so on. And so we're going to be having continued work group sessions to where people can actually hear from other departments as to what were their pain points and how did they overcome the challenges.
And let me make sure I understand this correctly, because the major cities group is a drone responders group, and membership is limited to jurisdictions with representing a population of 500,000 or greater. Is that accurate?
Yes, and we picked that number just because that's been a reference that's been used by others as far as major cities go, and that it gives us a reference point.
Gotcha. And I know another goal of the group, though, is to take the information gleaned from the major cities working group and then disseminate it to the fire service, law enforcement, all disciplines, not only through the educational conferences and programming, but through different types of meetings and multimedia presentations. So even if a smaller department isn't eligible technically for membership to the major cities group, they'll still be able to learn from the conversation and the interaction that's taken place within that group.
Yeah, I think that's true with all of our working groups, that we're working toward establishing some type of publication or presentation that can be put out where people can take advantage of it.
And if you are a representative of a public safety agency representing a jurisdiction of 500,000 or greater, and you want more information on the Drone Responders Major Cities Group, please send an email to majorcities@droneresponders.org. And the team over there will get your application processed and get in touch with you. All right. So we saw last week social media starting to kind of blow up, if you can say that in the public safety sector, but blow up about talk of this new tactical beyond visual line of sight operations waiver. And I know a lot of people don't realize this, but you had been kind of working behind the scenes for the better part of the last year, as I was witness to firsthand on many emails I was copied on making this happen. So can you kind of tell us, number one, what it is, what it means for public safety, and third, what it took to really bring it into fruition? Because I know it was quite a process.
So early on, I think York County identified the need to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight for tactical operations. And so the first version of this came out was called the Close Proximity Low Altitude Waiver. The idea being, let's keep it close to us, let's keep the altitude low so that we can minimize the risk and be able to use it in dangerous situations where the remote pilot and or the visual observer could be in harm's way. And literally, they might be in a line of fire. And this allows for hazmat situations, for firefighters to be able to be away from it and still operate, be able to use the drone to either use as a sensor or to see what activity is taking place. In an active shooter situation for law enforcement, it means you're able to not be out in the open, but be someplace safe and fly around a building, over a building, and see where an active shooter might be. The importance about this, because a lot of people say, well, why don't you just go for SGI? In these cases, literally every second could potentially mean the loss of a life. Every second. As we know in an active shooter situation. In an explosive environment, every second could determine when an explosion might occur. So they submitted their waiver and did a huge safety case and added a whole lot of different elements of an overflying aircraft and some other stuff, but it wasn't realistic for other departments to achieve. It was just too complicated. Advance forward, they did get their waiver for York County with all those additional safety requirements. Add to that, Chula Vista jumps in and says, we want to work on this as well. We were already partners with Chula Vista, and we were already working with Chris Sadler with York County, who's also one of our advisors, board of advisors. And so we collectively got together, and then we had other people that were coming in. So we had the three primary players on this were York County, Chula, Vista, and then Pearland, Texas came in. And they were, again, using all this collective information to continue to submit. So we went through like 7 or 8 iterations with the FAA. We met with them back in November. We laid this out. And I will say this, I have to give credit to Jay Merkel in that meeting early on. We came in with a long list, and it was a mix of commercial and public safety representatives with the entire UAS integration staff and some people from DOT who made the request. And I think at that point, my request was submitted as the dangerous mission tactical waiver. I was trying every different angle of different names. Then we tried to do the COVID-19 waiver.
Yeah.
And, so it was a mix of all these different things. And at the end of that meeting, he said, I know a lot of you have asked for things, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to do a lot for most of you in the room, but I am going to do something for Chief Werner in public safety, which they lived up to here recently in the past couple of months of announcing the waiver. So we have just been basically a collaborative source of trying to continue this forward, keep the discussion forward, and we kept pushing the FAA. And Jay Merkel will also say in the his post report that Charles Werner kept calling me, and I had to tell him, "Don't call me. Talk to my staff."
Hounding you? You're hounding him a bit, huh?
And he said. And once that happened, we were able to make things happen. So it's been a collective effort, and there are many others that are in the background of this that I don't always know, because there are people talking to people and collecting information and submitting things. So to all those people out there that have been a part of this, we all working for the same goal to achieve this tactical waiver. And then at the symposium, the guidance came out that provided the guidance of how to make a submission as far as the key elements. Now, here's where the roundtables came in. We learned things in the roundtables from the FAA representatives of some more things that really needed to be added to that guidance that they may or may not be able to do. And they said it would be helpful if drone responders could help get some of this additional information out, which we did. So we created a template request for this tactical waiver, and it's now in our waiver folder in the resource center at the DRONERESPONDERS.org website. And anyone can join and have access to that and utilize it, because it basically gives you everything you need to know from A to Z to submit this waiver. And to date, I think we already know that there's already 4 waivers that have been submitted since last night, since the template went out.
Yeah, and so again, for anyone looking for information on the new Beyond Visual Line of Sight tactical waiver, DRONERESPONDERS.org, they've got to register and become a member. There's no cost to become a member, right? They just register, and then they go into the resource center, and there's just a wealth of information in there. If you've been in there, there's folders that basically cover standard operating procedures, applying for waivers, managing programs. There's some great information in there at DRONERESPONDERS.org. You mentioned something, and I kind of said you were hounding him, but I want to point this out, because not a lot happens in Washington, D.C., without there being a driving force. That's why the lobbying industry is so large, and that's why it takes people clamoring for something and requesting something, and many times for there to be enough awareness of a need, and then to actually allocate the resources and appropriate the funding to make something happen. And I think it's important for people to understand that you were one of the main driving forces behind that tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. It's great the FAA did it. They deserve full credit for it, but it wasn't like they just woke up one week and said, hey, let's create a tactical waiver for public safety. You had to really make the case. And again, I know there were other people behind the scenes working the angle too, and kudos to all of you. But you really, I saw you driving this forward and almost relentlessly, to convince them that this was needed. So how long would you say it took? About 9 months for this process to actually take place?
About 8 or 9 months. And I got to say that the conversations that we were able to have with Mike O'Shea, Steve Pansky, John Meehan, they were all helpful in helping to shape that internally. And then, of course, we have to thank the 91.113 waiver team, who they're the ones that stepped up and said, yes, we're going to make this happen. But this was a journey for all of us. The FAA is learning about us as public safety. we're learning about the FAA and the safety culture, and that we've got to somewhere come to a place in the middle. And I think that's what's the most valuable part of this whole collaboration, is that we learn together, and this solution was created by both sides coming to that point of doing the whole point of Drones for Good.
Yeah, and you mentioned Steve Pansky and Mike O'Shea, and I think we're really lucky to have them in there representing public safety. I know they're both really dedicated to helping first responders and public safety agencies, get what they need to propel unmanned systems forward for these different types of operations. You and I have worked closely with Systems Operations Security Group. Tal Haley and the crew up there have been really great about reaching out to us because they want to make sure that public safety agencies understand what the process is when you need an SGI, when you need emergency permission to go out there and fly. And I know, through Ayrton Drone Responders, we've been kind of tracking what the perception is of public safety agencies towards the FAA when it comes to their willingness to support public safety UAS. And we saw those numbers at about 56% last year, about a year ago right now, actually, when we first conducted the survey. 2 months ago, the spring survey, that those numbers are up at 65%. So we saw about a 7-8% increase just in the perception of public safety agencies on how the FAA is responding to their needs. And I think with this new tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver, we're going to see those numbers increase even more.
Yeah, let's talk about the SOSC for a minute, because they're the men and women behind the scenes that people don't often see, but we interact with in some of those critical situations where we need that approval right now. We went from, if you remember, early on during the hurricanes several years ago, I guess it was probably 3 years ago, the first request came in and said, we can get that for you in 3 days. Yeah. And then it went to, and we said, well, that really doesn't work. And then it was, okay, we can get it for you in 11 hours. And now it's jumped forward to where 24 hours a day during these critical missions, we can have approvals within minutes over a verbal conversation on the phone. That is huge. And again, this is a learning journey we've been on together. And once we understand each other, great successes come between public safety and the FAA.
And as we have a few minutes left here before we close out, I mean, I think we're going to have some follow-up conversations, probably bring in some members of the FAA to continue these conversations, because there's so much there that public safety needs to understand. And I feel like we're just kind of scratching the tip of the iceberg. But as we begin to wrap up, can you just kind of tell everyone out there, if they want more information on the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver, what do they need to do right now to move forward?
Well, they need to get the guidance first. And in our waiver folder within the Resource Center, we have both the FAA guidance that's been published and our template. We put a template together that gives you step-by-step what to do and what information to include, even an example ConOps that was given. And some of the advice they gave us in the roundtable was, look at this guidance and kind of parrot it back. Don't go into over detailed discussions you don't need to. And you don't want to box yourself into a corner of too much specifics. Keep it broad, but all that's there. And then it's a 2-step process, and it's all in this document that you'll send an email to the 91.113 waiver team first. Once that's in place, they will look at it and they will send you an electronic approval back. Now, that does not give you the right to fly. The second piece of that is you have to go into the CAPS program and make your entries into your COA to the addendum. And then once that's approved, you now have the ability to fly under the tactical waiver. And the key point here, this is only open to agencies that have COAs. So if you're just operating a Part 107, this is not an option. Another reason why you should think about the COA process. And very quickly, what this allows you to do is to fly dangerous missions beyond visual line of sight, 1,500 feet out laterally, 50 feet above the highest obstacle, not to exceed 400 AGL, or the facility map ceilings that are in place for those controlled airspace, the sub ceilings as well. So in controlled airspace and in Class G airspace, you now can fly these missions without any additional approval. If you want to exceed these parameters, you have to call the SGI for an SGI at the SOSC.
So in a nutshell, DRONERESPONDERS.org, look for the Resource Center, the folder with guidance on the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver, and you'll have what amounts to step-by-step instructions to go through everything Chief Werner just said. Chief, any final comments before we close down this episode?
I think the key point here is that Drone Responders has really been designed to advance public safety UAS, and it means that we're all involved in a collaborative effort to move this effort forward. So I just urge people to join Drone Responders, become part of the collaboration and the number of different working groups that we have. Take advantage of the resources that are in the Resource Center. And if you have any questions at the end of the day, send them to me at charles@droneresponders.org.
And one final comment from my end. I saw that you had presented Jay Merkel and the FAA team with an award on behalf of Drone Responders for the work they've done on behalf of public safety UAS. So my congratulations and hats off to you and the entire Drone Responders team for acknowledging that. And thanks again to everyone over at the FAA for the work they're doing on behalf of public safety. This has been another edition of Taming Disaster. We'll see you again next time. Chief Werner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.